Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is a true terrifying Sasquatch encounter, simply entitled Sasquatch, a Nightmare in Broad Daylight. Let's get straight into that. Hello fellow Redditors. Before I get into the story, let us indulge in some background information. I want to be as detailed as possible so that you can all truly appreciate this story for what it is. One can't leave the nest if the nest is yet to be built, right? First, I want you to know that the story I'm going to share with you is 100% true. It is based on my account of an event that has significantly impacted the way I view the world around me. As humans, we take comfort in the known and are often fearful or skeptical of phenomena or entities that we don't understand. Of course, there's many people out there, myself included, who thoroughly enjoy questioning subjects beyond human comprehension, but alas, we are a minority, often lumped into a cynical category of conspiracy nutjobs. I'm not writing this story to change what you believe, but rather to share with you what I know to be the truth. I have followed countless subreddits over the past years, but this is my first time making an account, specifically for the purpose of posting this story. Disregard the silly account name. My sense of humour will surely be my end of days. For now, let us acquaint ourselves with the eager experience that dwells within me, yearning as its chance to finally be known by unfamiliar souls. I am the oldest of 2 children in a family of 4. As I write this, my mother and father are both 50, my younger sister is 20, and myself 23. My father recently retired from 29 years of military service in the US Army. Naturally, as in common in military families, I've seen my fair share of the world. We've been stationed everywhere from Georgia and Italy to Washington and Texas. Although I was born in Hawaii and am currently living there again, I always consider Washington State to be a place where I really grew up, so to speak. I lived there from 5th grade to 11th grade, years that were crucial in my transition from boy to man. The Pacific Northwest, as stunningly beautiful as any place on earth could possibly be, brought with it its fair share of curiosities. Many of you might know that the area is particularly famous for UFO sightings and Bigfoot sightings. Being the young child that I was upon my arrival, I took an interest in the unknown. Every week, as I was at the library with my mum, renting books about alien abductions, ghosts, yetis, Bigfoot, UFOs and crop circles, the Bermuda Triangle, demonic possession, and a myriad of other phenomena that commanded my attention. I included this information because it will be critical to the story later on. I will say for now that from my readings, I was pretty knowledgeable of what Bigfoot evidence consisted of. I have read many stories and reports of the infamous stench they carry, the loud shrieking cries they make, and many other signs of their presence. It is because of this beforehand knowledge that I remember some of the small details of my account. Had I not understood the traits that people have attributed to Bigfoot, many of the small details in my account would have probably slipped through the cracks. Now, let us visit the day of the event. That day I have kept quiet on for so long. I was 13 years old at the time and in 7th grade, so that puts us back in the year 2005. The spring season was coming to an end around this time, and in Washington, spring and summer are the only times one gets to enjoy the sun. Throughout fall and winter, it's pretty much just heavy rain, day in and day out. Summers were notorious for thunderstorms, though. It wasn't uncommon to wake up drenched in sweat and go to bed drenched in rain. Weather patterns in Washington state are the very definition of unpredictable. On this particular summer's day, it was Saturday, and my father and I decided to go fishing. We usually go fishing twice a month, and we usually go to the same spot to do so. A massive lake surrounded by dense forestry, located only a few miles away from an Indian reservation. It was a beautiful lake, and we loved being surrounded by all the trees and wildlife, with no cities or major roads nearby. It made for nice, peaceful bonding experiences with my father. He had just returned from his first 365-day deployment to Iraq, so I was eager to finally spend a day with my old man again. The lake itself was surrounded by forest, with the region to the west running out into the Pacific Ocean. The region to the north led to the Indian reservation, and to the east was a small town primarily consisting of Native Americans. Many of them from the reservation had set up shops in this nearby town. And to the south was the interstate that took you back to, well, civilization. With the exception of an occasional fellow fisherman strolling by, the lake was always desolate and eerily silent. After arriving to our usual fishing hole and unloading all of the poles, lures and tackle boxes from the back of the Toyota pickup truck my dad drove, I don't remember the model or year, everything was business as usual. The sun was out, and it was about 1 p.m, and my father kept sharing stories of his experiences in Iraq while I continued to eagerly beg for more. We casted out our lines, exchanged words, chewed some sunflower seeds, spit out the shells, and reeled in the lines, and then moved on to a different story before recasting and repeating the whole process. I loved it. It was a ritual only he and I fully appreciated the sentimentality of. Minutes turned to hours, and before we know it, it's about 5:30 in the evening. We decide to pack it in, and because it's nightfall soon in that part of the state, and it could arrive as early as 6 to 6:30, and we didn't want to be in the forest at night time, primarily because of bears and wolves. Keep in mind, however, that it is still currently bright out, and the sun has only just begun to make its descent beyond the mountains. With more than enough daylight to pack up, my father starts reeling in all of our casts and breaking down the poles. I packed up the tackle boxes and lures and threw them into the pickup bed along with the coolers and snacks we had packed. The poles were the only things left to be loaded, and then we would be ready to leave. I was about to tell my father that I was going to go take a piss real quick, and before I could even open my mouth, I caught a whiff of a smell that I still remember clearly to this day. It was rancid. The best way to describe the stench? Absolutely fucking rancid. I have never smelled anything so terrible in my life. "Do you smell that?" I called out. "What?" replied my father. I figured it must have just been something blowing through the breeze. Never mind. It smelled like a wet dog rolled around in its own shit, got hit by a truck, lied dead under the hot sun for 2 weeks, and then burst into some kind of maggot-infested stench cloud. And that's just putting it politely. The odour stung my eyes. "Dad, I'm gonna go pee real quick. I'll be back." He nodded, and off I went, into the shrubbery to our usual piss spot. Oftentimes we would just pee anywhere, but because we had seen a few fishermen walk by a couple of hours ago, I figured it would be safer to just go piss in the trees. We usually piss behind this massive fallen tree that's roughly 50 yards into the woods. It's leaned at a perfect angle that provides total obscurity from the lakeside. The forest itself is thick enough to probably conceal me without the aid of the fallen tree, but somehow pissing behind this tree just became a habit during the many visits we have made to this fishing hole in the past. As I'm pissing, the sky was suddenly enveloped in clouds in a matter of seconds. It was bizarre. There was still daylight, but it was more grey and toned down, as opposed to the sunlight you would get with a clear blue sky. It reminded me of a winter day, when the sun's presence seems completely absent. Then, everything happened so fast. As I'm zipping up, I hear a tremendously loud crack right behind me. I'd say about 30 yards away based on its reverb. As I'm in the middle of turning around, my face is sprinkled with the light droplets that precede a heavy thunderstorm. I scan the area where I heard the sound, but see nothing. My immediate thought was that it was just an old tree branch splitting off, which is common to hear in these woods. Crack! I hear it again, closer, but from a different direction. I'd be a liar if I told you my heart wasn't racing like a motherfucker at this point. I could easily have just run back to the fishing hole, but curiosity kept my feet glued. It was like knowing what made that sound was a prerequisite to concluding our fishing trip. After about 2 minutes of me standing there foolishly and realizing that I'm getting drenched in the rain, that it's beginning to pick up, I chalked the noise up to a thunder and turned around to head back to my father. Part of me was in denial though. It wasn't a boom sound like thunder. This was a crack, like something big was being snapped in half. I took about 3 steps in the direction of the fishing hole when I heard the most bone-chilling sound that I have ever heard to this day. Hey! It sounded like a cross between a man screaming on top of his lungs and, well, another man screaming on top of his lungs. I know that might seem silly, but that's really how I remember it. It sounded like 2 men screaming in unison, with slightly different pitches in their voice. I didn't have time to think about where that dreaded noise came from. My arse was on high gear. I remember shortly after that noise from hell, I heard my father shout my name with obvious worry in his voice. I know he heard the sound as well, and probably thought it was me screaming, or thought it was an animal or something. As I'm sprinting to the direction of the truck and making every effort to control my body shaking, adrenaline is a bitch. While jumping over branches and logs and manoeuvring between foliage, I suddenly hear crunch, 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 crunch. Something is walking through the woods very close to me. Dad! 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 Was all I could manage to get out between short breaths. And holy shit, I see it. I see it. I fucking see it. While sprinting forward, I see a dark mass in the far left of my field of vision growing. Everything was a blur, so I just assumed everything in the corner of my eyes was bushes, trees, etc. And then I realized this isn't an immobile object that's growing. This is something that's coming closer to me, getting bigger as the distance between us closes. Suddenly it hit me that this approaching object was the source of the crunch, crunch, crunch. So I turned my head to the left, and what I saw accelerated me to speeds that I would think are humanly impossible. Approaching me with tremendous speed was an ape-like creature with massive swinging arms. Those I remember the most. The arms were massive and long, almost lanky in the way they dangled, but very, very muscular. This creature was bipedal as all hell. You know, how when you go to the zoo, you see monkeys and gorillas walking around with some assistance of their forearms, kind of like tromping around on all fours, but occasionally using just 2 feet before leaning back onto all fours. Yeah, not this thing. This creature was full on striding towards me with its legs, while its arms swung lazily at its sides. My biggest fear was that all it had to do was reach out to grab me, because its arms seemed long enough to do so. This thing was so fucking close to me, and all I could focus on was going faster and faster and faster. I recall the awful smell being present again. It was in full force, just the worst stench anything on this planet could produce. I was too scared to care, but I definitely remember the smell being heavy. The final details I can recall from my brief glimpse at this demon of the woodlands was that it was easily about 7 or 8 feet tall and matted with thick brown fur, very long fur too. Its head was conical in shape. It seemed to narrow at the top, but from head to toe, this thing was matted in very, very long brown hair. I remember seeing bits of leaf and foliage stuck throughout its fur on its body too. I didn't dare try and make out facial details, although sometimes I wish I had. I couldn't see much of the face from my distance, combined with my constant running, and at the time, I really didn't want to know what the fuck this thing looked like. Its body gave me more than enough fear for a lifetime. By this point, the rain is coming down heavy, and I kept telling myself in my head, please don't slip, please don't slip, please don't slip. Dad! I must have screamed that about 1,000 times. I remember making a few attempts to scream, but nothing would come out because my throat was very raw and sore from all the screaming I was already doing. I also remember thinking, why does it feel like he's, my dad, so far away? The walk to the piss spot is just a short one, and yet I swear I was running full speed for a good few minutes before I made it back. Fear does incredible things to your sense of time and space. As I approached the clearing and could make out the pickup truck, by some incredible grace of parental intuition, my dad pulls up some very genius shit. I'm not sure what prompted him to do this, but as I'm approaching the fishing hole, I see him standing by the edge of the woodline, looking for me through the foliage. His truck is already on and running. His driver's side door is open and he's close to it, as if he knew that whatever was happening to me was going to involve a much needed quick escape. The truck was parked in a way where the driver's side was already facing the woodline I'm running out of, so I had to think we were dealt a good hand on this day. At the very moment we made eye contact, my dad turns around and hauls ass for the driver's seat, but not before shouting, "Jump in the bed, get in the back, hurry!" I should note that this is only a 2-seater pickup, so my options were to circle around the truck and get in the passenger side door, or to jump in the bed. It's obvious which option is far less time consuming. Crunch, crunch, crunch. All I can think about is how happy I'm going to be to see the fucking interstate again. Crunch, thud, thud. This thing is still following me and is now out of the woods and running on the dirt. Its footsteps are the only indicator of its presence, while my visual focus is purely on what's ahead. I remember quickly eyeballing the best point on the ground to jump from to make it into the pickup bed smoothly. Thud, 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 and another "Aye!" The shriek happened just as I made my leap of faith, and I would even go as far to say that it terrified me so much in a way that it made my jump even stronger. I jumped like my life depended on it, and no sooner than my body made contact with the bed of the truck, my dad fucking floored it. I shifted violently around as he gunned it from 0 to 60 miles an hour. I couldn't feel the vicious bruise on my arm that had taken when I landed on one side of the tackle boxes. I couldn't feel the sharp ringing in my ear from the shriek of defeat the creature emitted. I couldn't feel the sting of the 2 fishing hooks that burrowed just beneath the skin of my right calf. I didn't care about anything. I only cared about going home. As I gathered myself and braced myself in the bed of the truck, I looked down the rapidly vanishing dirt path we had come from and caught only a glimpse of the creature's back as it strode back into the dense foliage of the woodline. Rain was pouring down heavily, creating a light film of mist that eventually shrouded the remainder of the creature. Tall, built, hairy, and aggressive. It looked like its head was hung low, or its shoulders were slouched. Its posture didn't seem as upright as it was when it was chasing me. Whatever this thing was, it was used to having its way, and today we didn't grant him that. I remember grinning from ear to ear as we approached the first back road that led through the small town to the east. Seeing a stop sign has never made me so happy in my life. It was more than just a stop sign. It was a sign of humanity, a sign that civilization was near. During a 30-minute drive to town, one thought kept racing through my mind. That was a friggin' Sasquatch. We stopped at a bait shop in the small Native American town, which consisted of a few old wooden shops and some townfolk who were bringing in things inside and scurrying to cover up their belongings from the rainfall. We asked the owner of the shop if he had any band-aids and a sink we could use, since my leg was bleeding pretty heavily from the fish hooks. He looked like he was in his mid-30s, very smooth complexion, dark brown skin, and a very long black ponytail running down his back. He was more than happy to help us after he saw my leg. He went into the back office and returned with a wet washcloth and some gauze, and was accompanied by an older man who looked like he was in his 60s, with brown wrinkled skin and long grey hair, also in a ponytail. We explained the story to them while the older man was inspecting my wound. After he removed the hooks and cleaned up the cut, he wrapped my leg firmly with gauze. Then, the younger man spoke to us about how he has heard similar stories from that lake before about a large, hairy creature who lurks in the woods. None of the people in the town or from the reservation ever go near the lake. According to him, it's considered cursed grounds, and he explained to us some natives' ancestors who were buried there for various atrocities. I don't fully remember every fine detail he told us, but he definitely said that that's an area that people should avoid, which would explain why it seems like nobody is ever there. He said oftentimes fishermen will come back from the lake and stop in town to get gas and share stories of seeing large beasts while they were down there. Some of them say they saw massive bears walking around like men. The older of the men asked us if we were familiar with the legend of Sasquatch, and my dad and I both said we were familiar with it and that it was one of our first guesses when we saw the creature. I remember the old man just nodded his head and went back into the office. Those were the only words he said. It creeped me out. It was as if he was silently confirming our suspicions. The younger man told us one last story about how there are tales that the Sasquatch causes thunderstorms. He summons rain because it somehow affects the patterns that fish appear in, or something to that extent. I don't remember the specifics, but he noted that it was interesting that we were telling him the story of what just happened when a thunderstorm had just picked up. Then I recalled that when I first heard the crack while peeing, the raindrops started to pour down and eventually became a thunderstorm. It gave me chills. After my wound was taken care of, we thanked the men and left the bait shop. My dad ran into the gas station and bought 2 beers for us. We sat in the parked truck and each drank our beer while holy shitting every detail of our encounter while nightfall slowly took over for the evening. Then, after a good few minutes of speculating and thanking God that everything turned out fine, we got back on the interstate and headed home. Rain coming down in sheets. We've told family and friends of our encounter, but nobody seems to fully understand what we went through on that summer day. How can they? It's a terror that must be felt to be understood. They didn't see what we saw, but that's okay. I wouldn't wish such a sight on my own worst enemy. I guess this experience has taught me 2 things. As humans, we are only a tiny speck in a world that is beyond our control. We can never truly know everything that is out there. And to those who remain skeptical of anything deemed an imperfection in the history of mankind, I must say, such a stance demands great ignorance. Oh, and also, just piss wherever the hell you want. Wow. Hope you guys enjoyed that story. I'm sure some of you may have heard that story before, but it is one of my favourites and I love to share that on this channel. Please do let me know down below in the comments As ever, guys, please do like and share. And remember, folks, be safe, not sorry.